On New Year's Eve 2016, something happened in Zapa, Mexico. My family and I go there every year for the holidays because we have an apartment there. It's a nice break for my dad from his work. Our apartment is part of a building complex with 24 apartments in total. They are split into 4 towers and they all look the same. We've had that apartment for a few years, and on New Year's Eve one of the residents invited us and many of the other families to their apartment for a party to celebrate. About 35 people came to the party. The apartment was on the 4th floor and we got there around 10 p.m. We planned to celebrate the rest of the night together around 10:50 or 11 p.m. One of my mom's friends looked up at the sky and said she saw something strange. At first most of us, including me, didn't pay much attention and kept talking, but after a couple of minutes more and more people started looking up. When we noticed the commotion, we got up and went out to the terrace to see what was going on. At first it seemed strange, but I would describe it as the stars twinkling. We could see stars, but these ones were much closer together than normal and twinkled in a weird, irregular way. As we kept watching, more and more stars appeared and started twinkling. Some people said they were just regular stars and that we were overreacting, but then the stars we thought were in the sky began moving toward the other twinkling stars. At this point everyone started to get a little scared. I've always believed we might not be alone and that there are strange forces out there, but this was the first time I truly had no idea what was happening. There were too many to count, but we all agreed there were about 100 to 150 stars twinkling in one part of the sky. More kept moving across the sky to join them. When they stopped gathering, they kept twinkling in a strange way. It wasn't like the soft dimming of real stars, it was more like lights quickly turning on and off. Then the whole group moved across the sky and disappeared. We were all standing there with our mouths wide open. Many of us tried to take pictures or record it, but nothing showed up on our phone cameras because it was too far away. With about 35 people seeing it, and only an hour after we arrived we knew we weren't imagining it. The most interesting part is that the apartment owner's son said he had talked to someone the year before who claimed to see something similar on New Year's Eve. He said he listened to the story but didn't take it seriously, thinking it was just a random rant. My family and I still talk about what we saw. We tried to look up any events or natural phenomena that could explain it, but we found nothing. When I was about 12, I spent New Year's Eve at my friend's house while our parents went to a restaurant in a nearby town. The house was really old and far away from other houses, which made it feel super creepy. To get there you had to drive up a long overgrown path surrounded by tall trees that almost blocked out the sky. Some of my friends at school said the house was haunted, and I even remember hearing that the house was mentioned in a ghost book, which made it even scarier. So anyways, we were sitting downstairs in the living room watching TV when we heard a really loud crashing sound. I can still remember the look in my friend's eyes when we turned to each other completely shocked. It took us a while to get up the courage to go and see what made the noise. We slowly left the living room and walked down the hallway trying to stay quiet. The sound seemed to come from upstairs, so we decided to go up and check it out. When we got to the top of the stairs, we felt a freezing cold breeze coming from somewhere. It wasn't just chilly, it felt like ice against our skin. We slowly walked down the hallway following the cold air. Then we turned into another hallway. This house wasn't just big, it was enormous, almost like a mansion from the 192s, with high ceilings and long dark corridors. It felt like the house was watching us. At the end of the hallway we saw his mom and dad's bedroom door. It was slightly open and moving back and forth, creaking softly as it swung. We both stopped and stood still, Completely frozen, neither of us said a word. After a moment my friend started walking toward the door. I was too scared to move and stayed behind a little. He pushed the door open and stepped into the room. It was so dark inside that it swallowed him up. I could barely see his shadow anymore. For a few seconds everything was completely silent. Then out of nowhere he let out the most terrifying scream I've ever heard. My heart started racing, and without thinking I ran toward the room to see what was wrong. I felt around for the light switch and quickly turned it on. He was standing completely still, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear, staring at an empty corner of the room. Just to the side of him was a massive antique mirror shattered into pieces. The broken glass was spread all over the floor. I slowly stepped closer, carefully avoiding the broken glass, and put my hand on his shoulder. His skin felt cold, like he'd been standing in the freezing breeze we felt earlier. "Are you okay?" Without looking at me, he whispered. "She broke the mirror." His voice was shaky, almost like he didn't believe his own words. Confused, I asked who broke it. Finally, he turned his head slightly toward me and said, "The woman in the corner." At that moment, I brushed it off and told him we should leave. He agreed and started to walk out with me, but just before we left, I couldn't help myself. I wanted to check the mirror. I thought maybe the wire holding it had broken or something, so I bent down and carefully turned the mirror over, and to my surprise the string that held it to the wall was still perfectly fine. It hadn't snapped. I looked at the wall and the nail was still firmly in place, exactly where it should be. That's when fear really hit me. I was so scared. I told him to call his parents and ask them to come home right away. We waited outside by the front door until our parents got back from the restaurant. When they arrived, my dad and his dad went straight upstairs to check the bedroom. They saw the broken mirror but didn't take us seriously. They said we were probably messing around and playing a game that got out of hand. The scariest part is this: I'm 24 now, and recently I was chatting with my mom about random things. Since New Year's is coming up, that night from years ago came up in the conversation. I decided to tell her the full story about what happened. After I finished, she looked at me and said, "I believe you. Your friend's mom told me something a few days after that night. She said she saw a woman in her bedroom standing there, and the woman told her to leave the house." Hearing that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It gave me chills all over again, even after all these years, and I started having flashbacks to that night. Even though it's been almost 12 years now, to this day I still can't figure out how that mirror fell off the wall. For it to fall, someone would have had to lift it up and over the hook. It couldn't just fall on its own. And as for the woman my friend seemed to be staring at in the corner of the room, I think it's better if I just try to forget about it. This happened on New Year's Eve back in 2017. I'm from Ohio, just outside of Cleveland, and I was flying home after finishing up a semester at the University of Rochester. I had to stay at school a week after the semester ended for personal reasons, so I unfortunately spent Christmas relatively alone. The flight itself was fine, but I'd already been in a sour mood before I even boarded the plane. I'm a big Browns fan, and as I was at the airport, the Browns lost their final game of the regular season to go 0-16, completely winless, and as a lifelong fan it was a special kind of misery. I think we were the first team to go winless since like the 80s or something. To top it off, my flight was delayed, which ruined my family's plans for the night. Originally we were all supposed to drive to my cousin's house together for a New Year's Eve party and st the night, but because of the delay my parents decided to leave early, taking the main car. I was stuck driving the spare car alone. My mom tried to make it up to me by leaving Ver or Golden Retriever behind to keep me company. I wasn't thrilled about making the trip solo, but Ver was always good company. I figured I'd make the most of it. By the time my Uber dropped me off from the airport, it was creeping on 10 o'clock. I didn't even bother unpacking. I just jammed all my stuff in the car, got Ver locked up the house, and got on the road. The drive itself wasn't anything special, just miles of Ohio back roads winding through empty fields and patches of forest. There wasn't much snow on the grounds, just a light dusting, which was nice since I hated driving in the snow. It was pitch black dark, though the only light came from my headlights and the occasional farmhouse with its porch light glowing faintly in the distance. About halfway into the trip, Vera started whining. At first I thought she just wanted attention, but then she stood up pacing in the passenger seat. That's when I realized she needed to go to the bathroom. I groaned, knowing there wasn't much else I could do but pull over. The next clearing I came across was small, barely enough space for the car, but it would have to do. I remember noting to myself how dark it really was out there. If not for the patches of white snow here and there, I probably wouldn't have been able to see into the woods at all. I jammed my hands in my pockets and tried my best not to freeze to death. Ver didn't seem to care about the cold or the darkness. Classic Golden Retriever. I let her out, not even bothering to leash her. She sniffed around the edge of the trees, taking her sweet time. She didn't wander far, just enough to do her business, and that's when I heard it. All of a sudden a loud crashing sound echoed from somewhere in the woods. It wasn't just a branch breaking, it was heavier and deliberate, like someone or something was moving through the trees. I literally jumped from how loud it was. Imagine a grown man sprinting through the forest. That's genuinely what it sounded like. I scanned the darkness, squinting to make out anything, but it was too dark to see beyond the first few trees. Before I could react, Six bolted directly into the woods. It was some worst nightmare type stuff, I'm telling you. She disappeared into the trees, and I lost of her in mere seconds. I yelled her name over and over, but she didn't come back. At that point my heart was racing, and it started getting hard to breathe. The cold didn't help matters. I couldn't leave her out there. That wasn't an option. Without thinking, I ran into the woods, blindly yelling for her to come back. I didn't want to think about what she was chasing after, so I just ran, letting the adrenaline take over. The only light to aid me was my dim phone flashlight and the thin layer of snow on the ground. It was so dark I was practically running into the trees. I kept running, praying I'd find her before she caught up to whatever was in there. I ran until my lungs gave out from the cold, forcing me to take a break. After nearly falling over from exhaustion, I leaned up against a tree and felt myself about to break down. I honestly didn't know what to do, and then finally I saw her. She was crouched low and shivering, walking slowly toward me. Her tail was tucked tightly between her legs. I had never seen her like that before. I dropped my knees and embraced her. Relief flooded through me. She pressed against me and I could feel her body trembling. Something had terrified her. That's when I snapped back to reality and realized how serious the situation was. We were still in the middle of the woods, and there was still something out there. I sprung up from my position and told Vera to follow me. This time she obeyed and stuck by my side like her life depended on it. We started back to the car, but I had no idea if I was going the right way. As if things weren't bad enough, I damn near jumped out of my skin when I heard crashing from behind me. I didn't think I just started running. Six darted ahead of me, and I followed her, praying I didn't trip. The crashing sound didn't stop this time. It seemed like it was following us. I can't even tell you how scared I was in that moment. I genuinely felt like I was going to die. By some miracle, VR led me straight back to the car, and I practically threw her inside before slamming the door shut. As I was jumping in the driver's seat, I glanced back towards the woods, and my stomach dropped. There were 3 figures standing at the edge of the woods watching us. I jammed the keys in the ignition and floored out of their eye. Didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I was still in shock. It wasn't until I'd driven a few miles that I noticed Ver was bleeding. I started panicking as I realized there was a cut just below her shoulder blade. Someone had stabbed her. I slammed on the brakes and ran around the car to the trunk. My mom always kept a first aid kit in every car, and for once her insistence on being overly prepared paid off. I cleaned Vi's cut as best I could and wrapped it in gauze. She whimpered, and I worried that I was hurting her, but I knew I was doing the right thing for the first time since the whole sequence had started. I felt myself begin to relax. It was over. I tried not to think about it for the rest of the drive, but I was just so shell-shocked that something like that had happened to me. I ended up not telling my parents or relatives. I don't know why, it just felt like one of those things you keep to yourself.